But
It's recording.
all right, now it is.
No,
Now
it's-
it's recorded.
Okay, so yeah, this laptop's a little bit quirky. So anyway, tonight we're going to talk about job attitudes and organizational diversity. And those are two, diversity in business, and those are two very important topics. Before I do though, let me talk a little bit about writing. I'm not that interested. I know a lot of you are kind of like, when you get writing instruction, they kind of encourage you to experiment and try things. I'm not that interested in that sort of thing. I want you to learn the mechanics, which for some reason the New York City schools have a absolute disdain for. I don't know why, because you need to know the mechanics to write for business. And most of you want to go into business. You want to be in business, you need to be clear writers. You don't need to be creative. You know, Shakespeare was not a business executive. John Milton or William Blake, you know, they weren't trying to make money. They were trying to express them. That's all great. I'm not against that. But basically, that's not the purpose of business. In business, you want to be clear. And the way you're clear in writing is that you have to understand the shared rules of grammar. So the better you are at understanding these preconceived rules, the better a writer you will be. You know, and those of you, I know a large share of you are English second language, ESL students, and that's fine. There's no sin in that at all. But basically, you, as well as the English first students, all need to improve, as I do. We all need to improve. And the way you do is you work on the grammatical rules. So I'm going to go over a few basic grammatical rules tonight to get you started thinking about how to improve your writing. Now, one of the really important concepts in writing is the idea of a main clause. Let me see if I can master this shared screen thing. I wasn't very good at it last time, I remember. All right. You can all see the whiteboard, right? Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we could see it.
Okay. Now, when I press text, there should be, oh no, this laptop is, oh, here it is. Okay, so can you see the letter J now? Can you
Yes.
guys, what?
Yes, we could see it.
Okay, great. So basically, this idea, which I wanted to emphasize, is that it's called a main clause, and another name for it is an independent clause. And you should see this. You'll see these terms used interchangeably, is all I need to say. Now, the idea of a main clause or an independent clause is that it can stand alone as a sentence because it has a verb.
Sorry, I just came on. Sorry to interrupt. I just have a question. Did you do attendance yet by any chance? That just came
No,
on. I don't know if I
I
missed
did
it.
not do
Okay.
attendance.
Oh, okay.
The main clause or the independent clause can stand alone as a sentence because it has a verb that does not follow a conjunction. So basically, a conjunction. Now, what is a conjunction? A conjunction joins two clauses. A clause is any phrase that includes a verb. So, for example, when I go to school, go is a verb. All right. So when is what's called a subordinating conjunction. So I think you can all see that this is not a sentence. when I go to school. And the reason it's not a sentence is that the only verb follows the subordinate conjunction, subordinating conjunction. Okay, this is called a subordinate clause because it follows a subordinating conjunction. The subordinating conjunctions include words like because, if, when, how, and there's many, many other ones. You can look them up. They can also be multiple words. So it could be as though, there's a lot of them that are multiple words. I don't think of any at the moment, but this is the idea. So basically, subordinating conjunctions begin a clause that has to be attached to a main clause, and that's called a subordinate clause. Okay. In contrast, the main, okay, so this is all, how do I clear all this stuff? All right, so this is all these things. So now, in contrast, a main clause does not follow a conjunction. All right, so basically, if you write, for example, I go to school, that is a main clause. It has a verb, go. It has a modifier, an adverbial preposition, to, and an adverbial phrase, to school, that describes go. So you say, I go, where do you go? I go to school. It modifies go. So basically, this is well, this is basically a main clause. Okay, now, when you write a main clause, it can stand alone as a sentence, and a lot of your sentences should just be main clauses. All right, should just be independent clauses. For example, if you say, I have a friend, his name is Alex. Okay, these two main clauses are fine as sentences. You can write those as sentences. You don't talk that way. All right, writing is not talking. People may have told you, I know there's a lot of bad advice given in high school that, oh, you should write the way you talk, or use commas when you pause, because a sentence just describes how you talk. And that's not true. The written English is different from spoken English. And part of the difference, and this is especially true of business writing, is that it needs to be a lot clearer. So a lot of your clauses should be main clauses alone. They don't have to be this simple, but a memo written in a company with this kind of staccato short sentences is a lot clearer than if you try to write like a German philosopher, okay, and have like 42-word sentences. Now, the average English sentence has 15 words. Okay, this is a number I want you to keep in your mind. 15 words. English sentence. Okay, so if you're writing sentences with 40 words, you're doing something wrong. All right, and most of the time, there are two reasons. You're either adding too many subordinate clauses, which you should cut off and create separate sentences out of, excuse me, or you're writing extra long sentences with multiple main clauses in a sentence. Now, you're allowed to write more than one main clause in a sentence. And sentences that have more than one main clause are called compound sentences. All right, so compound sentences have more than one main clause. They can also have a subordinate clause, but that's not what makes them a compound sentence. So you can write this: I have a friend and I like my friend. All right, it's not the most articulate thing, but so it just shows you the idea. I left out the article. I don't want to encourage you to do that. I have a friend and I like my friend. Okay, the two main clauses here are I have a friend and I like my friend. Now, what I did here was I joined the two main clauses with a comma and another kind of conjunction called a coordinating conjunction. So I said just a minute ago that subordinating conjunctions can't stand alone as a sentence. There's another kind of conjunction called coordinating conjunctions, and they can link two main clauses, and that's their main function. And they're very easy to remember, unlike subordinate clauses, because subordinating conjunctions. So there are dozens and hundreds probably of subordinating conjunctions. If you look them up, if you look up on the web a list of subordinating conjunctions, you'll see that they'll list you a few, but there's many, many more. In contrast, there's only 8 coordinating conjunctions. And they're easy to remember because they like the World Series. Okay, they like the World Series because they are fanboys. They're baseball fanboys, and the fanboys are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. So you can join two main clauses with a comma followed by a fanboys. And that's an easy way to put two main clauses together. Now, while it's legal grammatically to do it, you don't want to have more than 2, possibly, rarely 3 main clauses in a sentence. Okay, generally your sentences should have 1 main clause. To make it less staccato, every 2 or 3 sentences, you add a compound sentence. All right, so I have a friend. His name is Alex. My friend and I go to school and we like our teachers. Okay, that's the kind of thing. So in other words, you might have a couple of one main clause sentences and then a compound sentence. All right. Now, what if you don't obey my command today? That you have more than 1 main clause and you don't join it with a comma followed by a fanboys. Let's say you write something like this. You write, I have a friend, his name is Alex. Okay, this is what's called a run-on sentence. Another word for it is comma splice sentence, because you're splicing 2 main clauses together with a comma. And it's called a run-on sentence because it's running on when there should be some punctuation or conjunction joining the 2 clauses. All right, now, is a comma followed by a fanboys the only way to join 2 main clauses? And the answer is no. There are 3 or 4 ways to join main clauses, and I'll tell you what they are. 1, comma,
Hyphen?
question? Comma followed by fanboys. And the fanboys again are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Okay. 2, a semicolon. So you could write like this: I have a friend, semicolon, his name is Alex. This is right. A semicolon can replace the comma and fanboys. It can also replace the period. You can always, the reason you would use a semicolon is if the two sentences are close in meaning, close in important, the meanings of the sentences are connected. I'll put it that way. And so you join the sentences with a semicolon rather than a period. You could also write this, it's perfectly copacetic. You could write, I have a friend, period, his name is Alex. So the third way you could say is two sentences. Okay, so you could use a comma followed by a fanboys, a semicolon, two sentences. Okay, now there's a fourth way. The textbooks often, a lot of the treatments online forget about the fourth way, but no one will deny it. The fourth way is a semicolon. Sorry, not a semicolon, just a semicolon, a colon. And the idea of a colon is it's not the most common punctuation mark, but if you can use it, it's very useful. The way you use a colon is that you have a main clause. So you have, you start with a main clause. I have two friends. Then if what follows the main clause completes the meaning of the main clause. So in other words, if what comes after a main clause fulfills the main clause or explains the main clause or somehow complements the main clause, then you can use a colon. So you could say, I have two friends, Alice and Sam. Okay, the two names fulfill what comes before the colon. Now, colons can precede lists, they can precede phrases, they can precede quotations, and they're often used to introduce quotations. They can precede full sentences. So in English style writing, and the Brits are a little different from us. And somebody once said that the British and the Americans are two people separated by a common language. And sometimes you can see that when I talk about grammar, because there's often style differences between the two forms of English. But the Brits will not capitalize what follows a colon. Whereas in American English, I'm not kidding, in American English, we capitalize what follows a colon after when what follows is a sentence. So if what follows is a sentence, you can capitalize. So for example, you could say something like, I don't have two friends who like me. I have two friends who love me. Okay, maybe that's not the best use of a colon, but I'm just illustrating the use. So this would be capitalized anyway, but if what follows the colon is, I wouldn't use a colon here normally, to be honest, but you can. But if what follows the colon is a main clause, then capitalize the first letter. Otherwise, leave it lowercase. I hate two things: broccoli and meanies. Okay, the colon introduces the two things that you like. Okay, so basically, we don't have a lot of time, so I'll cut it off here. But that's something I want you to think about. Now, if you want a good book on this stuff, there's a book that's beloved by a lot of writers. hated by a lot of English teachers. I read it right after I graduated from college, and I've read it a couple of times, a few times since, as I've started teaching students about writing over the last 10 years. And I highly recommend it. It's called Strunk and White, Elements of Style. Strunk and White are the authors. Now, there may be a new co-author. There may be a new co-author because I believe E.B. White passed away a long time ago. I'm pretty sure, and it's been revised. Oh, I'm sorry, I've got my personal emails up here. Elements of Style by Strunk and White. William Zinsser, who wrote another good book on writing, on writing well, which I recommend also, says in that book, he says in On Writing Well, it's sold several million copies. Strunk and White, I don't know, millions, 10 million, I don't know how many. Zinsser says in On Writing Well that if you're a writer, you should read Strunk and White once a year, not once a year. That's how important he thinks it is. And I haven't read it that many times, but I can guarantee you'll get a lot out of it. It's a very short book. It's about 120 pages, but it's dense and it goes into everything I talked about just now, and then a lot more, of course. But it's a good place to start to learn about how to write clearly. Okay, so I'll continue this next week, and I hope it helps you start thinking about how to write well. So tonight, we are going to, let me get off this whiteboard
Professor.
here. Yes.
Quick question. Are we supposed to write the paper as if, like, you know, in report form, or more in like emphasizing professionalism or emphasizing clarity? Because sometimes the two
Well, your writing should always be clear. If you look at the assignment, it's to write about 12 o'clock high. So you need to think about that and think carefully and intelligently about the issues you want to raise about 12 o'clock high. Apply concepts from the course, but write grammatically, write succinctly, to the point, and clearly. Okay, it's a lot harder to write a one-page paper than a 10-page paper.
yeah.
Because you have to condense what you think. Somebody once said that if someone can't explain a business idea in one sentence, they don't understand their own idea. And when I worked for Johnson and Johnson a very long time ago, but I'm sure it's still true, the rule there was that your memos couldn't exceed 2 pages. You could have attachments. At Procter and Gamble, the rule was your memos cannot exceed 1 page. Okay, so you had to explain yourself in 1 page. All right, so this thing that they do in college where they say the longer the paper, the harder or the better, or the more you learn, that's not how it works in corporate America. In corporate America, they're looking for clarity, succinctness, to the point, no bullshit, excuse the French, no double talk. They want very, very simple explanations. So when I used to prepare presentations, my boss's boss was named George McDonald, and he used to give presentations to J&J's board all the time. And we had to like do the slides for him and stuff. And the rule was, like, my office mate once said to me, when you do these presentations, write as though you're writing for kindergartners. It should be so clear and so simple that, you know, you're writing for children. So basically, you know, everything I had been taught in college was wrong. I mean, it was right if I was going to become a professional philosopher, but that wasn't my aim in life. Okay, I wanted to make money. I wanted to be, you know, a business person, not a thinker. You know, not that I didn't want to think. Of course, I wanted to think, but not a professional one. So basically, it's the exact reverse of what they lead you to think in college. So basically, you want to make your essay really clear and work on how to do that. All right. Now, sometimes I get students who say stuff like, oh, I'm going to be an accountant, I don't need to write. Man, that's absolutely wrong. If you're an accountant, you're going to have to write letters to your clients. You're going to have to write opinion letters. You're going to have to correspond with the SEC. You're going to have to correspond with CEOs. And, you know, you're going to turn them off if you can't write well. All right. So basically, this is something you should all be working on. And, you know, like I said, I read Strunk and White after I got out of college, because one thing I found when I got my first job at a Fortune 150 company, International Nickel, at that time was an independent company. It's now part of Valet. And like, I was surprised that so much weight was put on writing. And now with email and everything, it's, you know, it's still really important. So, you know, you need to be able to be clear. And if you're not, this leads to all kinds of communication problems, which we'll talk about later in the semester. All right, so tonight we're going to talk about
Thank you.
attitudes, and we're also going to talk about diversity. So I'll start with attitudes. Attitudes have three components:
Professor,
cognition.
I'm sorry to cut you off,
Pardon?
but I'm sorry to cut you off, but for the paper, do you want a double space or single space?
The paper will be double spaced, but don't worry about it yet. We've still got weeks from now for that.
All right, sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So basically, attitudes have three components: a mental component, cognition; an emotional component, affect; and some objective behavior. I'm more of an economist than a psychologist, to be honest. And to me, the one that really matters is the behavior. You know, people think a lot of things. I all through my life, I've had all kinds of crazy thoughts. If you don't act on those thoughts, they don't have any real importance. What matters is what you actually do, not what you think. But the psychologists have a very good point, which is that if you think something a lot, you're likely to act on it. All right. So basically, attitudes do have behavioral consequences. Some attitudes result in more distinctive behaviors, some result in less distinctive behaviors. Whether someone acts on an attitude depends on social pressure, depends on how accessible the action is. But it also is true that if you ask someone their attitudes and you really find out what they are, they will act on them later on. All right, so attitudes can be very important. Someone says they're going to commit suicide, it's quite possible that they're going to commit suicide. Okay, somebody just says idly, oh, I'm going to kill myself if they find out. That's nothing. But if somebody says it seriously, then that should be taken seriously. Okay, so basically, now it's also true that when people express attitudes, the attitudes are often unitary. In other words, they won't express an attitude if they have conflicting thoughts about it. And the reason is, and you can see this in 12 O'Clock High, we're just talking about the paper, with the case of Gately. In the movie, Savage says to Gately, you're the bottom of the barrel, you stink, you're a coward, you're yellow. And he says to him, paint leper colony on your plane because you get all the losers. And basically what that probably was meant to do, they don't say it in the movie, but that kind of abuse leads to cognitive dissonance. It leads to, if somebody has high self-esteem, they're going to reject that kind of ascription to themselves. They're going to say, well, I'm not the bottom of the barrel. I'm going to prove him wrong. Now, of course, not everyone will react that way. So, it's probably not a good way to manage people. But there are some people where you can do it. like when I was at UCLA, I had a professor, and he's really the reason I went into higher education rather than business. And he said to me, I wrote a paper for him and he tore it. He said, "This is crap, redo it. You MBA students don't, you don't know how to write a paper. Where's the hypothesis?" And he explained to me what a hypothesis was, but this abusive kind of thing, a lot of people would have just dropped the class. But I then went and I proved to him I could do it. And then I became really fascinated with the idea of like, what is a hypothesis and how do you prove it in scientific writing? So the cognitive dissonance he created in me led me to think about how to study organizations statistically. And that in turn led to my becoming an academic. I did work in the business world and I pursued that interest for 5 years after business school, but I still was thinking very much about what that professor had taught me. So basically, one important attitude your book talks about is the idea of organizational identification, which is the extent to which employees define themselves in terms of the organization by the same characteristics that define the organization. So basically, if I see myself as a Brooklyn College guy, I work for Brooklyn College and I'm a Brooklyn College guy, and I have the attitudes of Brooklyn College, then I identify with Brooklyn College. Now, there's a whole category of workers that you should be aware of that the book calls gig workers. Gig workers are people who work for a gig. They work like a rock band plays for a night, a gig. So they work for a short time. Now, these could be people like temp employees, and they could also be people like long-term consultants, other kinds of advisors. So basically, because they're short-term, they tend to have less identification with the organization. However, I would say that if you can encourage such workers to identify with the organization, they're going to be happier and more satisfied, and also better workers. Because when you identify with the organization, you assume the goals, and you have a passion for what the goals are. It's also true that if the organization is ethical, then ethical behavior as well as motivation can follow from identification with the organization. Job satisfaction, job involvement, organizational commitment, these are all important attitudes that, along with employee engagement, are likely to be associated with organizational identification. Perceived organizational support is another variable that your book talks about, and it's also likely to result in a high degree of satisfaction. It means that employees believe that organizations value their contributions. It's important where authoritarianism or power distance is low. In other words, where people don't respect authority. In more authoritarian countries, it's less important. But perceived organizational support is where you feel as though the organization is giving you a lending hand. It's aiding you in accomplishing your goal. So the college says to me, "We want you to publish." And I say to the dean, "Oh, I need some research money to, write a paper." And the dean says, "Oh, okay, I can find that for you." And he gives the money to that's basically perceived organizational support. So it's related to empowerment, that the idea that people feel increased self-efficacy. Their core self-efficacy is supported. That if people feel empowered, their job attitudes are likely to be positive. And basically, the way that you empower people is through organizational support. Now, if you look at the question of engagement, you can look at it as the enthusiasm an employee feels for a job, giving your soul or your passion for your work. Engagement is highly important in the time of crisis. It increases employees' sense of autonomy and resiliency, their ability to withstand stress. Engagement also is supported by clarity, training, and training. Okay, gig workers will find work fulfilling when they develop long-term relationships, when they feel engaged, when they perceive organizational support, and they will tend to be more satisfied with their jobs. Now, what about job satisfaction? Is it important? I teach another class called Business 3200, and Wetton and Cameron, the textbook authors, who are also eminent scholars like Timothy Judge is as well, they argue that job satisfaction is not all that important to motivation and to productivity. So the treatment in your textbook is different from the treatment in the other book I use, Developing Management Skills. But your book argues that job satisfaction is highly important to motivation, and that studies consistently find that when employees are satisfied, they become more productive. I think that it's more complex. I don't really believe that the most productive people have always been the most satisfied people. You can be frustrated and productive. You can be angry and productive. I don't think the two necessarily go hand in hand, but it could be that in a broad swath of the population, they're not really that involved with their work, and so moods and emotions and attitudes will modify how willing they are to work. If they get frustrated, then they're going to kind of exit from the job. Okay, and this idea, your book talks about the model of exit, voice, and loyalty. Now, this idea, exit, voice, and loyalty, is this. If you are a customer in a competitive industry, let's say like the pizzeria industry in New York, and you go to a pizzeria and you think the pizza sucks, what do? You probably just say, all right, I'm not coming here anymore, and you just go. All right, so that's called exit. Yeah, you quit, you leave. You don't.
To be honest with you, I don't do that, Professor.
What?
I don't do that.
You don't do that? You'll tell them it sucks?
To be honest with you, I usually, because my dad owns buffets, like he owns multiple
Wait,
buffets. So
speak up a little. I'm not hearing you.
I'm saying my dad owns buffets, so I technically know how it's experienced. So if anything bad about the shop I go to, or pizza, whatever, I usually go up to the manager, tell him, you guys have to fix this, 1-to-1.
Well,
You know
that's
what I mean?
good,
I
'cause
don't
you're in
be.
the industry, so you know it. I don't think
Yeah, I know how it works.
would do that. Like if you go to a concert and it's not good, do you tell them?
I mean, cancer is a cancer, you know what I mean? But in the business field, something different, you know what I mean? Cancer, who am I be speaking to? Because I'm not gonna know nobody over there. But let's say in a shop, you're gonna able to meet up with the manager, you're gonna meet up with the boss or whatever. so you could speak them. You know what I mean?
Okay. Now, somebody just messaged that something about adding them. I guess that's not to the adding them to this, it's adding to something else. All right, so in any case, yeah, well, that's very interesting. But anyway, Albert Hirschman wrote the original book, Exit, Voice, and Loyalty. He was an economist. He wrote a lot of interesting, very creative stuff. And he argued that if the costs of exit are low, and for example, if there's a competitive market, you'll leave. You won't make a fuss. But if there's a monopoly, so let's say you're unhappy with the electric company, then you might file a complaint because you can't go to another electric company. Okay, so voice occurs where you're constrained from exit because either there's a monopoly or because of loyalty. That the idea of loyalty is that you really like the product, and so you don't want to leave the company. So one of the things that Hirschman was saying is that he wrote this book at the time of the Vietnam War when there were a lot of protesters. And he was saying that the people who protest, people would say, oh, if you're protesting the war, you're a traitor. And he was saying, no, it's the reverse. If you're protesting the war, it means you're loyal, because if you weren't loyal, you would just leave. If you're loyal, then you care enough to protest. So this model of exit, voice, and loyalty was developed by a lot of labor economists. There were these two guys, Freeman and Medoff, who wrote a famous book about unions, what the unions do. And they took Hirschman's model and they extended it to unions. And they were saying, unions cause employees to become more loyal because they get higher wages. Unions do legitimately get higher wages for their employees. So the employees stay there for the longer term, and they're more likely to protest rather than to quit. So in non-union firms, there's higher turnover. It's also true in the government. In government work, there's lower turnover. And if people disagree with something in a union shop, they can protest through collective bargaining. In other words, the negotiations that labor and management go through when they're at odds, they want to arrive at a contract, but also grievances when an employee is at odds with the company. And the employee, for instance, is told that they did something wrong, or they need to do something right, and they're given a letter, or they're put on suspension, and they file a grievance, and then the union and the company negotiate. So both of these involve discussions rather than just quitting behavior. So Freeman and Medoff argued that this is how unions substitute voice for exit. And your book has a slightly different model. It talks about four kind of nodes that an employee who actively expresses themselves and is constructive will have voice. An employee who is passive, but they're also constructive, will be loyal, but they won't voice. But Freeman and Medoff differ in that they don't see any difference between loyalty and voice. They basically say, if you're loyal, you're going to have voice. That was really closer to Hirschman's original book. Whereas if there's a destructive response to that's active, then the employee will exit. They'll just quit. And if there's a destructive response that's passive, the employee won't quit, but they'll goof off. So they'll sit down and read a book, or sleep on the job, or drink on the job, or do something something counterproductive. All right. Now, the book talks about, this is an important idea, two kinds of behaviors that are directly related to attitudes. One is organizational citizenship behavior, and the other is counterproductive work behavior, OCB and CWB. Okay, Organizational citizenship behavior is self-evident. It's, you all know what it is. The employee who goes out of their way to help other employees, the employee who goes out of their way to help the company accomplish something, someone who stays late to help the boss get something done, people who volunteer for a needed service. These are all organizational citizenship behaviors, people who avoid littering or who encourage other employees to maintain a orderly workplace. There's millions of examples. These are all people who have good organizational citizenship behavior. In contrast, counterproductive work behavior is where there's a destructive response, and it could be passive or not. And the employee is angry about something the boss did. Their attitude turns negative because the boss did something to them that hurt them in some way, and it's quite common. And they might either not do their job or not do it well. Back in the 60s, before the economy became globalized, and in those days, the US car companies had it wasn't a monopoly, but an oligopoly of the car industry in America. The auto workers were very unhappy. They were earning great money, but they had boring jobs. And for some reason, they were unhappy. They felt they were being abused. And so they started sabotaging the cars they were selling. And this was on top of already existing quality problems with American cars that continued into the 70s and 80s. And so the sabotaging of the cars, it really did damage the reputation of American cars. And then the Japanese had a whole different approach based on the ideas of W. Edwards Deming, which was to emphasize quality. And this idea of higher quality led to cars lasting a lot longer. And the Japanese did not have these counterproductive work behaviors. They were totally loyal to the company. They had totally different attitudes. Largely, well, it was a combination of factors, but one of them is the Confucian philosophy underlying Japanese culture. So there was that was a contributing factor without a doubt. But it was also true that the Japanese companies had in the past been abusive before World War II. They were run like a lot of the American companies, and they switched in World War II. They decided to adopt Deming's ideas and also the idea of lifetime employment. And so they started to treat the employees a lot better with long-term employment. They encouraged a lot more loyalty. And Japanese culture is such that debts are repaid. It's very important to them, to their honor, that debts be repaid. And the great anthropologist, not Margaret Mead, the other one, the name of the book was The Chrysanthemum in the Sword. Ruth Benedict. I'm sorry, Ruth Benedict. Excuse that momentary lapse. The great anthropologist Ruth Benedict wrote The Chrysanthemum and the Sword based on interviews with Japanese Americans. And I don't want to go into the details of it, but basically she found that culturally they had a great deal of emphasis on debt, and the ideas of an and giri, that you owe debts to the emperor and society, and you owe other people debts if they do you favors, and basically that there's a lot of emphasis paid on repayment. And so a company that's loyal to its employees is going to generate a great deal of loyalty from its employees. And so the Japanese companies came in gangbusters using the ideas of Deming and also ideas that were developed in from the 1950s into the 1970s by Toyota Motor Company, based on its production chief, Taiichi Ono. And it's called the Toyota production method. Today it's known as lean manufacturing. And basically they revolutionized management based on these ideas. And a lot of the reason it went so well with the Japanese was the human resource management they practiced, and the loyalty they showed to the employees, which in turn was repaid many times over by the employees to the company. So,
Professor,
yeah,
did the lack of diversity help the Japanese companies?
say
The
that again.
lack of diversity, did that help
Yes.
the Japanese companies?
Yes, very good question. I thank you for asking that. That's true. Uh, a lot of the research on diversity is based on American companies, which are very diverse. But if you go to Japan, they're not diverse, but and they also discriminate against women. So basically, but they do well, so it's a very diversity is a very complex question. And before I get into that, let me just make one more point about job satisfaction. Your book points out, and this is very interesting to me. In 1987, 61% of American workers were satisfied with their jobs. In 2010, 42%. So it fell by almost half. 19 from by a third, almost a third, I mean. And then in 2017, 51% were satisfied. So it's much lower still than 1987. But only half of American workers say they're satisfied with their jobs. Now, going back to unions, you would think that because unions have long-term employment relative to America, I'm not talking about Japan, which has lifetime employment, but American unions have long-term employment relative to non-union shops, that the employees would feel more loyalty, but the reverse is true. Okay, and it's a very interesting puzzle. Now, of course, American workers, unlike the Japanese, are governed not by a Confucian culture. Its culture here is basically Christian, if you will, compared to Confucian. So basically, their attitudes are totally different in the mindset. There's much more individualism in America than there is in Japan. So there are huge, huge differences, but it's still a puzzle. And I don't think any labor scholars have really figured out exactly why it is that in union shops, employees feel less job satisfaction than in non-union shops, even though they're paid more and have better working conditions. Your book mentions pay as a predictor of job satisfaction, as well it should. This thing of, I think I might have mentioned in an earlier session that the original ideas of the great advocate of scientific management, Frederick Winslow Taylor, argued that jobs should be restructured based on time and motion study, and that incentives need to be used, that in order to motivate workers, you need to use money to motivate them. And the Human Relations School, which really organizational behavior is based on the Human Relations School, put a lot of weight, as your textbook does, on job satisfaction. And they also emphasize the importance of groups and teams. And they said money is bad, money bad. And I always thought that was ridiculous. I always thought that weakened their argument. That came from the one of the early advocates of the Human Relations School, Elton Mayo. And I always thought that was ridiculous. Your book doesn't say that. Okay, so they've grown out of that nonsense, that money is money is bad. And there's tons of these writers and management who keep saying money is bad, and they're famous. I mean, Hertzberg's two-factor theory, theory X and theory Y, and more recently, Alfie Kohn's claim that incentives are destructive of motivation. And all of these ideas absolutely dismiss the use of money. But the simple truth is that money is a motivator. And I can tell you that because there was a time about almost 20 years ago when I went up for tenure here, and I knew if I got tenure, I'd make a good salary for the rest of my life. And if I got turned down for tenure, I'd have to scramble and find money elsewhere. And I was very motivated to get tenure. All right. And believe me, it has a lot to do with the money. I'm not saying it's only about that, but of course it does. It's a job, and jobs pay money. That's why, if I were to say to you, well, I'll do you a favor. You know, I'm daddy big bucks. I'll pay you what you make now and I'll give you a 50% raise if you promise not to work for the next 5 years. I'll pay you every year your salary plus 50% plus benefits. And all you have to do is stay home and do whatever you feel like, but you can't work. Would you take that deal? If the answer is yes, then you probably care about money at least a little. If the answer is no, then God bless you, you don't care about money that much. Okay, so think about that a little. So basically now, in general, people like jobs where they get paid well. Okay, there's no conflict between the two. And in fact, I think the most interesting jobs are the ones that get paid the most. I used to have these in-laws years ago in my first marriage, and they were all in advertising. And I hated them because they all loved their jobs. I mean, they were all like doing stuff like drawing pictures of Mickey Mouse and, you know, selling dishwasher fluid with like singing women and all kinds of stuff like that. And I was always jealous of them because they all loved their jobs and they were all making $500,000 a year. And I said, how come I can't get a job like that? But of course, I didn't know how to do stuff like that. But my point is that just because a job is fun doesn't mean it doesn't pay well. All right, so basically, you can have a job you love and be well paid. That was a lesson I learned from them. So basically, in contrast, if you look at job dissatisfaction, job dissatisfaction, or people are unhappy, they don't want to go beyond their typical expectations, as you do with organizational citizenship behavior. They hate the company. In that case, they'll do counterproductive work behaviors. So job now, of course, you say are more things than just the environment in the workplace contributors to whether people have positive job attitudes. And the answer is yes. Your book goes into it. So for example, positive core self-evaluation and self-efficacy leads to greater job satisfaction. People who feel like they are empowered will have greater job satisfaction. Intelligent people seek jobs that satisfy their curiosity, so they have higher satisfaction rates. So personality factors and ability factors can contribute significantly to job satisfaction, along with organizational environment, rewards, how you're treated, and how I would say also how much you achieve. A lot of people have high growth needs or achievement needs, and they want a job where they can demonstrate their competence. And so in such jobs, such people will be much more satisfied and they'll be positive. In contrast,
Can they be paid less?
what?
Can they be paid less because they like the job? And the
Sometimes,
facts are
a lot of people just want the challenge. Not everybody cares about money. I care about money. I mean, I feel good if I have some money to spend. I like that. But not everyone cares. I mean, there are people, there's a famous story where I think it was the guy one of the people who first explored the North Pole or something. And he ran an ad. I have to look up who it was. He ran an ad in the paper in London. And he said, help wanted, low to no pay, horrible work conditions, likelihood of death, immense challenge. And the London Times got more responses to that ad than any other help wanted ad it had ever run up until then. So go figure, all right? But basically, not everybody cares about money. It's absolutely true, but I think a lot of people do. And, I think there's a lot of dishonesty about it too, because, like many people, not all religions say money is bad, but a lot of religions do. And so, they say, I don't really care about money. I know it's wrong. Money is the root of all evil and so on and so forth. And basically, this leads to people denying they care about money. But in fact, they do care about money, and so there's a lot, I think, disingenuousness about it as well. I don't believe in that. I think you should be honest to yourself. So basically, you asked about Japan, and that's a very interesting question. I recently watched this video by a management consultant named Sam Ovens. In fact, I'll put his website. He has a site called consulting.com. And he no longer trains beginners, I've been told, but he has like tapes of his old training program available. And I highly recommend them. I think the program costs something like $500. My wife gave them to me for free, so I saved the money, but they're well worth $500, I can tell you. I'm looking for my, where's my, all right, I'll use this thing. So let me put this on screen share. I'll show you this Sam Ovens video. And I'll tell you what he said about this. Desktop 1, share. Okay, you see my screen now with the grass on there. So you can see this is my backyard, and you can see the turkey. I get this family of turkeys running through there every once in a while. Can you see that? Can you guys see that? No?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah, okay. So basically, let me find Sam Ovens. Actually, I think the website, yeah, okay. All right, well, anyway, this is his, yeah, here it is, consulting.com. He's not that much older than you guys, to be honest, about 30 or so. And he's absolutely brilliant. He talks about how to set up internet consulting businesses, internet teaching and consulting businesses. I highly recommend these videos. Well, anyway, I'll stop the share now. So anyway, and I was listening to a set of, I think it's the second week he does a lot about how to become like success minded. So it's not just about the technicalities of setting up websites, you know, like training websites, but also like how to psychologically think about how to make money and be successful. And he was saying in there that he disagrees with a lot of the diversity stuff in your textbook. And the reason he says it is that he says this idea focuses on the past, that it focuses on who you already are. You know, they talk about stuff like your gender, your race, your age, your whatever, you know, all the stuff they talk about, intersectionality, that you're a combination of these different things. And Ovens says, what's important in making money is not your past. It doesn't matter that you had an abusive parent or that you had some unlucky breaks or you weren't given the opportunity you hoped for. All of that's in the past. What matters is not who you are, but what you aim to become. And I think that's incredibly good advice. That, in other words, and your book kind of talks about this abstractly when it talks about finding the underlying beliefs that can unite employees. I think that this is closely related to that idea, but it goes beyond that. That, in other words, no matter who you are and what your background is, what you really want to do is become someone else. That's what he says. And the person you want to become is the person who makes $1 million or whatever. I'm not saying that's the only thing you might want to become. You're not currently that person. Okay, you don't currently have the $1 million, but you want to become the person who gets the $1 million. And so all of the past stuff has to be shed. And if all you do is spend your time thinking about the past and who you are already, you will never think about who you want to become. And the person who makes that $1 million or $1 billion or whatever it is, I know my students are I once asked my class how much is a lot, and they all said they want 50 million, they want 100 million. The sky's the limit to my students, and that's good. That's fine. I want the sky to be the limit. But the thing is, that if you want to make $100 million, you will not make that $100 million as you are. You have to become somebody else to make that $100 million. And the person you have to become is the person who makes $100 million. So you have to study that person and see what they're like. And it doesn't really matter, any of the diversity stuff doesn't really matter, because you don't want diversity, you want to accomplish something. And it's something very objective. And so basically what he says is that you need to start focusing mentally on who you want to become. This is very closely related to ideas in the, in the self-help movement, positive thinking. He frames it in terms of quantum physics, and he says that that basically the entire universe depends on our perceptions. So we need to change our perceptions of who we are in order to make ourselves different. And I can't recount his whole thing. I'm not him, but basically, I highly recommend that stuff. I think it's very productive, and also it's very good because not only does he give you the mechanics, but he encourages you to think like an entrepreneur. And many of you want to become that. You want to become a successful entrepreneur, and that means that you have to evolve. That any great achievement involves an evolution. I'm not boasting of being a great achiever or anything, but even in my life, with my small accomplishments, I evolved over many years. You don't remain the person you are if you wish to accomplish certain things in life. So your book kind of talks about some similar points, but they're different. So your book talks about what it calls surface level diversity versus deep level diversity. And the idea of surface level diversity is that there are differences in outer characteristics, perceived characteristics that do not reflect how people think and feel. In contrast, deep level diversity involves differences in values, personality, and preferences that become more important in determining similarities in people as they get to know each other. And it's very important that people overcome the surface level diversity, not that they should value it, because it's good. We all value our history and our background, but that we need to overcome it as well so that we all work together and we all share certain values. Diversity means that we hire people without regard to race, ethnicity, age, sexual orientation, and other characteristics. Did I mention gender? No, I left gender out, but gender and many other things. And prejudice is an attitude representing broad generalized feelings toward a group or its members that maintains an unequal hierarchy. Stereotyping is closely related to prejudice. It means judging people based on your perception of the group. So you generalize from the individual to the group, and then you characterize the entire group as that. And that's wrong. All right, so not everyone in a group has one trait. So we all know this. I don't want to over preach to you, but we all know it's true. So basically, we can also have what's called implicit bias, which means a prejudice that's outside our conscious awareness, and that's true too. It's also true, and this is a very important issue in HR, that prejudice can result in discrimination, that actions or habits that maintain or reinforce some groups' advantages over other groups can often occur. Now, this idea of implicit bias is true. You don't have to look far to see that people tend to prefer their own. So anyone who's in any one group tends to prefer people who are like them, and that's not just in a group. In America now, I think there have been studies that have found that there's more weight put on what political party you belong to than on race. And interestingly, your book doesn't mention this kind of discrimination, but it's true. If I say to my neighbors, I live in a almost totally, it's roughly 70% say Democratic. If I say to my neighbors, I'm a Republican, they will hate me, they will scowl at me, okay? And vice versa, if I say to people who support Trump, I'm a Democrat, they will say the same thing. And the statistics are that the marriage rate among interracial marriages, the interracial marriage rate is now higher than the inter-party marriage rate in America. More people marry across races than marry across political parties. And this kind of speaks to the deep level bias. And I think one of the reasons is that universities are like one of the biggest places where people hate the other party, and they're intolerant of the other party, and they don't view that as a problem. So basically, all this talk about prejudice is true, and it's right about the the various characteristics I mentioned, but basically it doesn't go far enough. It doesn't reach this deep level diversity. And basically, if you hire only people who agree with you, then you will not get the value of diversity, because what the value of diversity is that you have many points of view. And so part of this is that you want to have different people from different backgrounds, different racial groups, genders, and so on. You get different perspectives. But if they all believe in socialism and that Trump is a monster and that Republicans are all evil and that free markets are sinful, then basically you don't have diversity. I'm sorry. And so basically all this talk of diversity is hypocritical. So basically then moving on, I will talk about a very important concept in the book, which is legally, how does discrimination play out? In other words, what are some of the rules against discrimination? And it certainly is illegal since 1964, and the history of the treatment of African Americans was horrific in America. And you had the civil rights protests of the 1950s, and in particular, the Birmingham bus boycott, and Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, and protests. And a lot of people perceived the need for some kind of legislative action to remedy many decades of government discrimination. The government mandated discrimination in the South, not in New York, not in the North, but in the South, discrimination was government policy. And this was instituted, the Democratic president, Woodrow Wilson, was the founder of modern Democratic Party principles, introduced Jim Crow into Washington. So the Democrats were the party of Jim Crow. I hope you know that. The Republicans were the party of Abraham Lincoln and fought the Civil War. They then didn't play a role actively in the Civil Rights Act, but the simple fact is that a greater percentage of Republicans voted for the Civil Rights Act of 1964 than Democrats. Okay, and the reason was that the Democratic Party was always an alliance of Northern industrial workers and the South, the Jim Crow meaning discriminatory South. And so half the Democratic Party, or close to it, favored discrimination and racism, and half the Democratic Party didn't. But the unions never came out against Jim Crow because so many of their members were in the South. Okay, and the Democrats were not the party that fought discrimination. They were the party that favored discrimination. I just wanted to mention that. However, it changed in the mid-60s when Johnson, who himself was a member of the Ku Klux Klan, he himself was a member of the racist hate group that dominated the South in the 1920s and into the 1960s. No one knew that until recent years. It was kept secret. But Johnson, although a member of the Ku Klux Klan, passed, was able to push through, which Kennedy wasn't able to, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And basically, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 said discrimination in the workplace is illegal, Title VII. So if you see Title VII mentioned in EHR literature, that's exactly what we're talking about, workplace discrimination. And what the Civil Rights Act said was that you can't discriminate against anybody on the basis of race, sex, national origin, race, sex, color, or religion. All right, so there are 5 things. And this then played out in the courts, and we don't need to go, it's just a brief discussion. If you take HR, we'll go into it a little more. If you become a lawyer and major in discrimination law, you'll go into it in a lot greater depth. This became 2 separate principles of discrimination that are used in the American courts today and guide HR policy. Number 1 is a disparate treatment, that you overtly treat people of different racial groups, religious groups, gender groups, color, skin color, coloring, or national origin. So you can't say, I don't like you, I'm not going to hire you because you come from Spain. That's illegal. And so basically, any overt discrimination is illegal, and employees can sue the company if they're treated this way. The second form of discrimination is not overt behavior. It involves rather patterns of discrimination based on statistical differences between outcomes. So let's say there's 2 groups, A and B. It could be anything. It could be like 2 religions, or 2 all religions versus Muslims, or all religions versus Jews, or all races versus whites, or whatever. It could be anything. And you can show that the rate of one group is at least less than 80% of the rate of the other groups, the hiring rate or the promotion rate, that the rate is less than 80%. You've established what's called adverse impact. And it then becomes the obligation of the firm, the defendant, to prove that there was a valid reason for this difference. So they have to show that the hiring methodology was valid. And valid means that there's some association, there's an objective association. It could be statistical, it could be in the content of the form of selection, or it could be abstract based on prior research. But there's some defendable basis for the hiring principles. If they can show that, then they can defend, even though there's adverse impact. If they didn't use an objective method in hiring, then they discriminated, and they have to. There are then damages. Now, your book talks about intersectionality, that identities interact to form different meanings and experiences. People can be viewed as cultural mosaics, that they're combinations of these factors. But as Sam Ubben said, this is something, it's all true, but I think what we all want to do is rise above it. We want to become that warrior who rises above their past and achieves greatness in a universal way. It's also true that some people feel they have stigmas, which are attributes that cannot be readily seen and are concealable. And these things might include gender identity and sexual identity. Hofstede created a model of cultural differences that your book talks about, and it's important. He describes, in his original book, he described 4 dimensions. I think he later added 5, and then your book talks about him adding a 6th dimension. So the original 4 dimensions that he talks about, this is basically how cultures distinguish themselves, how you can distinguish one culture from another. And the 4 original ideas in his book, Culture's Consequences, were power distance, how authoritarian the culture was, individualism versus collectivism, how individualistic the culture is, masculinity versus femininity, how much masculine and task-oriented values are versus femininity, how much relations-oriented emphasis there is, and feminine values, and uncertainty avoidance, risk avoidance, how risk-taking is the culture. The 5th dimension that he added was long-term thinking versus short-term thinking, which became important during the Japanese invasion when Toyota was overcoming the American car companies. And Deming, the creator of total quality management, argued that it was because of long-term thinking. Basically, he then added a 6th dimension, which he calls indulgence versus restraint. Your book also adds that cultures differ as to how tight and loose they are, the degree to which there are clear, pervasive norms and no tolerance for deviation are tight cultures. The opposite is true, that people don't mind how you behave. You can behave in weird ways, then the culture is loose. Your book also mentions a very useful idea, cultural intelligence. The idea that you can, you have an ability to effectively function in diverse cultural settings. This is a very useful idea. You want to develop that. I would say travel, which I'm planning to do a lot of in the near future. Learn about other cultures, try new things. In New York, we truly have, not on the personal level, but on the city level, a true cultural mosaic. And you know, I'm lucky. I just moved back to the city after many years of state purely. And, you know, I'm a few blocks from Chinatown. I'm a few blocks from Little Italy. I'm a few blocks from the East Village, where there's still some Ukrainian presence. So there's all kinds of different cultures, you know, in New York. And, you know, I know it's equally true in Brooklyn. We all know that. And so basically, the more we can expand on that cultural intelligence, the better we can be in international management. Also, a lot of firms celebrate cultural differences through diversity, equity, and inclusion. And your book then talks about, and I think this is where the Sam Ovens stuff comes into play in the textbook, fostering a common in-group identity, where the company says, okay, so we've got all this great diversity. Now let's create a unified group where we all share values. And basically, the common in-group identity is where we focus on what unites us instead of what divides us. One thing I've noticed about entrepreneurs in my dealings with them is that the majority of entrepreneurs I've met, in fact, I'd say every single one, did not care what race. I never saw an entrepreneur who discriminated on race. What they cared about is success, making money. There's a single color in business, and that's green, the color of money. Not the green party, the green color green of money. And so basically, this is what unites entrepreneurs, and why the free market can lead to reductions in discrimination, because people who are trying to optimize success won't discriminate. And there's a whole literature on that created by Gary Becker, The Economics of Discrimination, that discrimination is anti-economic. So basically, we want to improve our cultural quotient. So I've said some controversial things tonight. I hope I lose my job. I mean, I hope I don't lose my job, excuse me. But basically, we'll now take attendance, and we'll talk. We'll take attendance. So please say you're here when I call you, and then we'll end the session. If you have questions or something, feel free to ask me afterwards. Minhas, Ahmed.
I'm here.
Thank you. Muaz. Muaz.
I'm here, Professor. I'm here.
Oh, right. Okay. Dana.
I'm here.
Thank you. Karina.
Hi, Professor. I'm here.
Hello, Karina. Mariella dropped. Okay. Derek. Derek.
Yes, sir.
Jiaolin Shen.
I'm here, Professor.
Jiaolin.
Yes, I'm here. Hi.
Hi. Naisha Sherry.
Here.
Okay. Tyler Daly. Tyler Daly. Not here? Okay. Charles DeBross. Charles?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, Charles. Caitlin.
Here.
Okay. Reham.
Here.
Thank you. Fatima.
I'm here.
Thank you. Josanne.
I'm here.
Thank you. Raquel.
Here.
Thank you. Gabrielle.
I'm here.
Thank you. Brian.
I'm here.
Thank you. Maimuna.
Here.
Okay, thank you. Salma. Salma? You can go after I call your name, so, you don't have to stick around if you don't want to. If you want to, fine, but you don't have to.
Have a good day.
You too. Salma Kahanam. Not here? Okay, Catherine Kim.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, Professor. Have a beautiful, beautiful night. Take care.
You too, my friend. Take care, Moaz. Clinton.
You're welcome.
Here.
Clinton Kenyeti. Okay. Ilya.
Here.
Kolo.
I'm here, Professor.
Thank you, Ilya. Billy Cryam.
Hi, Professor. I'm here.
Excellent. Shanice Lawson.
Hi, Professor. I'm here.
How you doing? Alex Lee.
I'm here, Professor.
Thank you, Alex. Ava Luke.
Here.
Thank you, Ava. Lisbeth Martinez.
Hello, Professor. I'm
Thank
here.
you, Lisbeth. Kevin Castro.
Here, Professor.
Thank you. Kevin, are you here?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Barbara Mendick.
I'm
Barbara?
here, Professor.
Okay, not here. Leonie Miller.
No, I'm here. I'm here. Barbara's
Oh.
here.
Mendick is here?
Yes.
Okay, for some reason, I don't see your name. That's funny. All right, you got it. Leonie Miller.
I'm here.
Thank
Hello.
you.
Okay.
Jacqueline,
Hello, I'm here.
how we doing? Judy.
Hi, I'm Judy. I'm here.
Hey, Judy. Jessica.
Hi, I'm here.
Hey, Jessica. Oriana.
Hello, I'm here.
Hamza. Hamza
Here.
Nadeem.
Here.
Thank you. Anthony Nagoyan.
Here.
Diana Owusu.
Here, Professor.
Thank you. Sabita Pekayari.
I'm here, Professor.
Thank you. Sapir Rafaelov.
I'm right here.
Thank you. Shakira Risher.
I'm here.
Thank you. Eliza Silks. Sorry about that. My laptop's shaking around. Eliza Silks.
Here.
Thank you. Anastasia Stepanova. Anastasia? Okay, Zixuan Su.
I'm here.
Thank you. Nahima Sultana.
I'm here, Professor.
Thank you, Nahima. Rayvon Watson Taylor. Rayvon? Not here. Michael Williams. Michael? Okay, I see there's some notes in the chats here. I better look at the.
Professor, do you get me for attendance?
I'm not done yet.
Professor,
Hold
you-
on.
you're
People
done
got
or no?
divorced in 2020 because they were part of, yeah, I don't doubt it. I am taking it. Did you get me? That was Clinton. I think I did get you, Clinton. Do you add comments to our discussion? I don't normally add comments, no, but I give you that summary in the email. So, I give my thoughts in a general email so everybody sees them. I haven't found through the years that students always read the comments if I put comments on the discussion board. So I've gotten out of the habit of doing that, but I usually give fairly exhaustive comments if there's something I, have some thoughts on. I'll write a considerable amount. And I think I'm going to start doing a little bit writing correction, but I won't do it individually. I'll share it with the class so that everybody sees the corrections I make, and that'll help you think about how to improve your writing. Michael Williams. Michael Williams. Not here. Ben Wu.
I'm here, Professor.
Thank you, Ben.
Hi.
Hi. Kaplan, Steve Kaplan.
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you, Steve. Yang Wei Wu.
I'm here.
Thank you. And not but last but not least, Asen Yagladier.
I'm here.
Thank you. Okay, now I'm going to read off the people I did not call. The people
Professor, you missed me, Christina.
Kachenko.
Yes.
Oh, I accidentally. Yeah, you're okay. Yeah. Sorry
Okay,
about
thanks.
that.
Okay,
My
thank you.
mistake. Okay, I'll call up the people I called but did not answer. If you are here, let me know. Tyler Daly, Salma Kahanam. There aren't a lot. Very good. Anastasia Stepanova. Ryvon Watson-Taylor. And Michael Williams. There's only like 5 added. It's very good. Okay, so yes, any questions?
Yes, Professor. Good evening.
Good evening.
I have already written the task that we have to write before October 30 about the film. Since I received a letter from you with this task back in August, before our semester, and I did it. Have you seen my essay on the blackboard?
I'm not totally hearing what you're saying. You said I wrote you something in August.
Yes,
And
in August, I received your email about this task.
oh, and you did it?
Yes, I did it in August 12th.
Do you want me to clear it? Do you want to keep it, or do you want? I can just clear it off, and you can redo it if you wish.
Yeah, and I put in this assignment in a blackboard.
Yeah, in the in like that turn it in submission area.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so you want me to clear it off, or you want me to keep it?
1 second. Yeah, it's I see this in a 1 second. I see this is in grades, my grades, and 1 page paper on the 12 o'clock high due August 12th, and I did it in August 11th.
And what are you saying? You want me to grade it, or what do you?
Yeah, I see.
Yeah, well, I usually grade them all together. So if you like, I can correct your writing and help you with that a little, and but I won't grade it yet. You can resubmit it. I'll clear it off the thing, and you can resubmit it after I make the corrections, okay?
Okay, but I wanted to make sure you saw this.
I did not see it, so thanks for telling me, and I'll look at it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anyone else have a question?
I wrote one in the chat.
Wait, somebody, I hear there's like a lot of noise here. Okay, who's talking now? Shakira?
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
I had wrote my question in the chat about the comments on the discussion board.
Yeah. Oh, you didn't hear what I said?
Yeah, I heard what you said. I just added that oh sorry, there's a plane passing by. I had gotten a 3 out of 4 and I wanted to know like if there
Want to
was
know
some
why?
yeah.
I can look at it. I'll send you an email on it, but a lot of people didn't get the effects of the environmental factors in stimulating personality. A lot of people were not aware of that, and that was one of the reasons. But I can go over your, I don't remember your paper individually, but I will be happy to tell you.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Have a good night, Professor.
You too.
Professor, there's one due today as well.
I don't think so. Was there?
Okay.
I don't believe
No, I
so.
don't think so. I'm just making sure.
There's an
Okay.
optional discussion board.
Yeah, and if we're
If you
here,
don't-
we don't have
if
to
you don't
do it.
attend
Yeah.
class, then you can do the optional, but you attended class, so
Okay. Thank you.
you're welcome. Anyone else? No? Christina, you here? Ava? Jacqueline?
I have a question with the paper.
Okay.
So what do we have to write about? Like, because I'm reading at the syllabus, but I'm not comprehending
Okay, so did
what
you watch the
to.
movie 12 O'Clock High?
Not yet, but
Okay, so watch the movie and then identify some issue or issues that we talk about in the class that are illustrated in 12 O'Clock High, and critique the characters in terms of the concepts we've discussed. So, for example, you could talk about, we're going to talk about leadership. So you could talk about the leadership of Savage in terms of some of the theories that we're going to learn about concerning leadership. Or you could talk about how the 9/18th went through organizational change processes and how the concepts from the book are reflected in what happened to the unit. Or you could talk about the organizational culture of the 9/18th, or you could talk about stress issues, or you could talk about the use of cognitive dissonance in that I mentioned earlier, where Savage uses humiliation to motivate Gately. So there are a lot of possibilities, and I list them all in not all of them. I list some of them in the description of the assignment. So I'm leaving it up to you to pick what issue you want to write about. So you watch the movie and then you pick which psychological issues are illustrated in the movie, and you write a one-page essay about it.
okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Good night.
Good night. Anyone else? Christina?
No, that's it. Good night.
Good night. Take care. Okay, session ends 9:40.